23 years. That's how long I drove the same stretch of highway to work and back. Route 9 through Millbrook, past the diner that's been there since, before I was born, past the grain elevator, past the Lutheran church, where Carolyn and I got married in June of '98. I knew every crack in that road, every season of it. I thought I knew my marriage the same way. I was wrong about the marriage. I'm a forensic accountant, have been for 26 years, the last 14 as a partner at Whitmore and Greer in Columbus. What that means, practically, is that I find things people have hidden. Money, mostly. Transactions that don't add up. Ledgers that have been quietly adjusted. Numbers that smile at you from the page while lying through their teeth. I am very good at it. I have testified in federal court 11 times. I have never been wrong about a number. I tell you that not to brag, but because it matters. Because the way I found out about my wife was not dramatic. There was no screaming, no midnight confrontation, no lipstick on a collar. There was just a number that didn't add up. And once you see a number that doesn't add up, you cannot unsee it. That is not a skill you can turn off when you get home. Carolyn had been taking a pottery class on Thursday evenings for about 4 months. She'd started in February, after the holidays, when she'd mentioned feeling restless, unmoored, the particular dissatisfaction of a woman whose youngest had just left for college and whose husband worked 60 hours a week and sometimes forgot to ask how her day was. I thought the class was a good idea. I said so. I encouraged it. I even bought her a starter kit, clay tools, and an apron with her name embroidered on the pocket. Because that is the kind of husband I was trying to be. She came home from those Thursdays energized. Lighter. A little distracted in the way you are when your mind is still somewhere else, which I took as the sign of someone who had found something they genuinely enjoyed. I was glad for her. The number that didn't add up was on a Thursday in March. I was reconciling our joint account, which I do every month, not because I distrust Carolyn, but because I am a forensic accountant, and it is simply how I am built. There was a charge from a hotel, a Marriott, not in Columbus, in Cincinnati, $47 for a parking fee. Cincinnati is 93 miles from our house. The Pottery studio is 11 minutes from our house. I sat at the desk in the study, the one overlooking the backyard, where the oak tree I planted the year we moved in had finally gotten tall enough to give real shade, and I looked at that charge for a long time. $47, a parking fee. From a hotel in a city where we had no reason to be, on a Thursday evening when my wife was supposedly shaping clay. I didn't call her. I didn't check her phone. I didn't do anything that evening except close the laptop, go to the kitchen, and make the chicken stir-fry I'd been planning for dinner. When Carolyn came home at 9:15, there was clay on her hands and she smelled like coffee, and she kissed me on the cheek and said the instructor was starting them on bowls next week. "How was your Thursday?" she said. "Quiet," I said. "Good. Yours?" "Really good," she said. "Really, really good." She went upstairs to shower. I cleaned the kitchen. I did the thing I do with numbers that don't add up, which is write them down in my head and leave them there until I know more. I called my daughter, Blythe, that weekend. She was 24, living in Pittsburgh, working at a marketing firm she liked well enough but wasn't sure about. We talked most Saturdays, a habit we'd kept since she left for college 6 years ago. She was the kind of kid who stayed connected, who asked real questions, who wanted to know what was actually going on in your life rather than just filling time until she could talk about her own. I'd always been proud of that about her. I didn't tell her about the charge. I wasn't ready to say it out loud, and I think part of me understood that once I said it to someone I loved, it became real in a different way. It became a thing that had to be dealt with. And I wasn't there yet. "You sound tired, Dad," she said. "Long week," I said. "Work thing." "You always say that, because it's usually true." She laughed. We talked about her roommate situation, about whether she was going to stay in Pittsburgh through the summer, about whether her brother Owen had called her recently, because he hadn't called me. The normal circulation of a family. I hung up feeling something I couldn't name exactly. A kind of pre-grief, the weight of something you don't know for certain yet, but already sense in your bones. The following Thursday, I told Carolyn I had a late meeting and wouldn't be home until after 10, which was sometimes true and therefore not unusual. She said okay, said she'd leave something in the fridge. I drove to Cincinnati. Not to catch her. I want to be clear about that. I drove to Cincinnati because I am the kind of person who verifies before he concludes, and I needed to understand the shape of what I was looking at before I decided what it meant. I drove past the Marriott on 4th Street at 7:40 p.m., and I saw her car in the parking structure on the second level, and I drove back out and sat in the lot of a Panera across the street and stared at the dashboard for 40 minutes. Then I drove home. I made tea I didn't drink and sat at the kitchen table in the dark until I heard her car in the driveway at 9:30. 9:30. How was your meeting? She said, putting her bag on the counter. Productive, I said. How was Pottery? Good, she said. We did the bowls tonight. She went upstairs. I sat there another 20 minutes. Then I went to the living room and opened the laptop and did what I do better than almost anything else. I looked at the numbers, credit card statements, both cards, phone records, because I pay the bill and I know how to read them. The last 6 months, which was as far back as I needed to go. By midnight, I had a picture. It wasn't complete, but it was clear enough. Thursdays, consistently. 3 charges at the Cincinnati Marriott in 4 months. Several calls to a number I didn't recognize, always between 6 and 9 p.m. on Thursdays, sometimes running past 9:30. I ran the number through a people search service I use for professional investigations. It came back to a man named Victor Aldrich, 49 years old, licensed contractor, based out of Dayton, Ohio. I hadn't heard the name before. Not once in 23 years of marriage. I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet of my living room. In the house we'd bought when the kids were in elementary school, with the furniture we'd chosen together and the photographs on the wall going back to before the kids were born. And I felt the specific weight of a man who has just finished doing math and found that the answer is the thing he most did not want it to be. I didn't go upstairs. I slept on the couch. Told her in the morning I'd fallen asleep watching baseball. She believed me. Or she pretended to believe me. I was no longer sure which. I called my brother Hank from the parking lot at work on Monday. He was 3 years older, retired Navy, lived outside of Charlotte with his second wife, and had the particular clarity that comes from having already survived the worst thing happening and rebuilding on the other side of it. He was the only person I trusted to hear this without catastrophizing or giving me advice I hadn't asked for. He picked up on the second ring. You're calling on a Monday morning. He said, that's not a good sign. I need to talk. Pull over first. I'm already parked. Okay. A breath. Go. I told him the whole thing, the hotel charge, the drive, her car in the structure, the records. Victor Aldrich from Dayton. I told it the way I testify, in sequence, without editorializing, because staying inside the facts was the only way to keep from losing the thread of myself. When I finished, Hank didn't say anything for a moment. Then, how long have you been sitting on this? 8 days. And you haven't said anything to her? No. Why not? Because I'm not done looking, I said. And because once I say it, everything changes. The conversation changes. What she knows I know changes. And I can't unring that bell. Another silence. You're handling this like a case, he said. I handle everything like a case. It's the only way I know how to do things. Okay. He exhaled. Tell me what you need. Right now, just to say it out loud to someone who won't panic. I'm not panicking, he said. I'm just sitting here thinking about what you're going to do next. So am I said. So am I. I hired a private investigator named Keith Spanner, who I knew through professional channels, specifically through 3 separate fraud investigations where he'd run surveillance work that held up in federal court. He was 58, methodical, had a background in insurance investigations, and did not embellish. He gave you what he found, not more. I called him on Wednesday from the trail behind the Metro Parks Preserve near my office, where I'd started taking lunch walks in the last 2 weeks because sitting still had become intolerable. I need confirmation, I told him. Name, context, timeline. Nothing more than that. How long do you need? 3 Thursdays, I said. That seems to be the pattern. Understood. He asked a few questions, logistical, no curiosity in his voice, because good investigators understand that the why is your business, not theirs. I'll start this week. 3 weeks later, Keith called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I closed my office door and sat at the window overlooking the parking structure on High Street. Victor Aldrich, he said, married, 3 kids. Works commercial construction contracts, primarily in the Cincinnati-Dayton corridor. Financially, he's overextended. 2 personal loans, credit cards near limit, a business line of credit he's been drawing on regularly. A pause. He and your wife have been meeting at the Marriott on 4th for what appears to be approximately 5 months, based on the pattern. I've got photographic documentation from 3 Thursdays. Thank you, Keith, I said. There's one more thing. His voice didn't change, but I heard the weight in it. He's filed preliminary documents with a contractor licensing board in Columbus. Looks like he's planning to expand his territory. I understood what that meant without him saying it. Columbus was where I lived. Columbus was where Carolyn lived. Thank you, I said again. Send me the documentation to the secure email. I hung up, looked at the parking structure, counted the concrete pillars visible through my window. 14 pillars holding up a structure that a lot of people drove into without thinking about it. You think about it when you know how buildings work. You think about it when you know what holds things up. I had a full picture now, and a full picture changes what you can do with it. My accountant brain does not turn off in the evenings. This is both a professional asset and a personal liability. That night, after Carolyn went to bed, I sat in the study and mapped the situation the way I'd map a fraud case. What I knew, what I could demonstrate, what I couldn't prove but could reasonably infer. What the timeline revealed about duration, intent, and planning. Victor Aldrich had been working to establish himself in Columbus for at least 2 months. He had financial problems in his existing market. My wife had been involved with him for approximately 5 months. Those 3 facts, assembled together, told a story that was more complicated than infidelity. It suggested a direction, a future someone was planning for, maybe 2 someones. I called Eleanor Voss the next morning. She was a family attorney, 62, a former county judge who'd gone back to private practice, and who I'd been referred to 4 years ago when a colleague went through a difficult custody situation. I hadn't needed her then. I called her now. Martin, she said, because I'd met her at 2 bar association events over the years, and she had the particular memory for names that good lawyers develop early. I was wondering when I'd hear from you professionally. I'd rather it were under different circumstances, I said. They always would be. Tell me what's going on. I told her. All of it. Keith's documentation, the timeline, the records, Victor Aldrich Columbus expansion plans. She was quiet for a moment after I finished. You've done considerable groundwork, she said. It's what I do. Yes, a pause. Do you know what you want the outcome to look like? I know what I don't want, I said. I don't want a fight. I don't want years of this in front of a judge. I don't want Blythe and Owen to have to choose sides or watch their parents dismantle each other in public. But I also don't want to pretend I don't know what I know. And Carolyn. I looked out the window. The oak tree in the yard. The one I'd planted. The first spring after we bought the house. I'd driven an hour to a nursery to pick it out. Came home with it in the back of the minivan. Dug the hole myself in the middle of August. While Carolyn watched from the porch, with 2-year-old Blythe on her hip, and said it would never survive because I was planting it too late in the season. It had survived 21 years. She gets the house, I said. She gets enough to be stable. She's spent 23 years making a life here. I'm not going to take that from her, but she doesn't get to pretend this is something it isn't. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. And Mr. Aldrich? Mr. Aldrich, I said carefully, is planning to work in Columbus. Columbus is a city where I've been doing business for a long time, where I know people in commercial real estate, in city contracting, in the licensing boards. A pause. I think he should understand what city he's walking into. There was a silence on Eleanor's end that wasn't agreement and wasn't disagreement. It was the silence of a woman who had been practicing law for 37 years and recognized something she'd rarely seen. You're not angry, she said. I am, I said. I'm just not letting it drive. I want to tell you about the part no one shows in these stories. The part between knowing and acting, when you're still living inside the life that's breaking, going through the motions of a marriage that you've already finished grieving in private while the other person still thinks everything is mostly fine. I made dinner 4 more times. I went to 2 neighborhood events. I helped Carolyn pick out paint samples for the guest room, a project she'd been talking about since January, and I told her the sage green was better than the off-white, and I was right about that, and she smiled at me the way she used to smile at me, and I smiled back. I want you to know that was the hardest thing in all of it. Not the discovery, not the investigation, not the documentation. The smiling back. The day I chose was a Saturday in early May, 3 weeks after my conversation with Eleanor. When the paperwork was in order and 2 things I'd put in motion were ready to move. The first was the divorce filing. Eleanor had prepared everything. We'd go over it together the following Monday. The second was a letter, 1 page, on Whitmore and Greer letterhead, addressed to the Columbus chapter of the Ohio Construction Industry Licensing Board, which processes commercial contractor expansion applications. It outlined, with documentation attached, certain financial irregularities in Victor Aldrich's business records that I had identified in the course of reviewing publicly available filings, irregularities that under Ohio Administrative Code warranted review before a new territory license could be approved. I did not fabricate a single number. Every irregularity I cited was real. I had simply looked at his publicly available filings the way I look at everything, carefully, with the full attention of a man trained to find what's been hidden, and found that Victor Aldrich had not been particularly careful. People who think they're getting away with something rarely are. The letter went out Thursday morning. Saturday afternoon, I asked Carolyn to sit down. She came into the kitchen where I was standing, and she looked at my face, and she stopped. Whatever she saw there, she understood immediately that this was not a normal Saturday afternoon conversation. She sat. She didn't say anything. She put her hands flat on the table the way people do when they need something solid. I sat across from her and placed 3 things between us. First, a photograph. The Marriott on 4th in Cincinnati. Her car in the parking structure, time-stamped. Her face did not change expression, or rather, it changed in a way that wasn't surprise. It was something more like resignation, the face of someone who has been waiting for a door to open and has finally heard the handle turn. Second, Keith's report. Summary page only. 8 months of documentation compressed to 2 paragraphs. She looked at it. Then she looked at me. Third, the divorce petition. Filed Friday morning 9 a.m. Cause of action. Irreconcilable differences. Eleanor had advised against fault-based filing because it prolonged everything, and I agreed. I didn't need a judge to confirm what I already knew. I just needed it done cleanly. Martin, she said. And then she stopped, because there wasn't anything to follow it with. My name in her mouth like a sentence that didn't know how to end. I'm not here to have the conversation, I said. I want you to know that I know. I want you to know that I've known for a while, and I want you to know that what comes next doesn't have to be ugly. How long? She said. About 10 weeks. She closed her eyes. Open them. You never said anything. No, I said. I needed to understand the full picture before I said anything. That's how I work. You've known me for 23 years. You know that's how I work. She looked at the petition. Victor has his own situation to manage, I said, separate from ours. Something moved across her face. A question she didn't quite form. He was planning to expand his business to Columbus, I said. Columbus is my city, Carolyn. I've been working here for 26 years. I know the licensing boards. I know the commercial real estate firms. I know who sits on the contractor review committees. I paused. There were irregularities in his public filings. I reported them, as any responsible professional would. The silence that followed was very complete. Outside, the neighbor's kid was riding a bike up and down the cul-de-sac, a perfectly normal Saturday sound. You're giving me the house, she said finally. Not a question. Yes. And you're not going to fight. Not if you don't. She looked at me for a long time. I had known this woman for 26 years, since before we were married, since before the kids, since before the house and the furniture and the photographs on the wall. I knew the way her face moved when she was about to cry. I could see it now. Why? She said. If you know all of it, why are you? Because you're the mother of my children, I said. And because what you did doesn't erase what I know about who you were for a long time. I stood, smoothed my jacket, the thing I do when I need to feel organized. And because being cruel about it wouldn't make me feel better. It would just make 2 more people miserable. She was crying by then, quietly, the way she cried, always quiet, even when the kids were little and she was exhausted and overwhelmed, she never made noise about it. "Where are you going?" she said. "Hanks," I said, "for a few days. Eleanor will be in touch next week about the timeline." I picked up the overnight bag I'd packed Thursday morning and put by the front door. "Martin." Her voice, at the edge of something. I stopped at the door. "I don't know how to." She stopped, started again. "I don't know how to tell you I'm sorry in a way that means anything." "I know," I said. And I did know. And it was the truest and most complete thing I said that day. I walked out, got in the truck, backed out of the driveway of the house I'd lived in for 18 years. The house with the furniture we'd chosen together, and the photographs going back to, before the kids were born, and the oak tree I'd planted. In August, when everyone said it was too late in the season, I didn't look back at it. Not because I wasn't going to miss it, but because if I looked back, I wasn't sure I'd keep going, and I needed to keep going. The drive to Charlotte is 7.5 hours. Hank met me in the driveway with a beer and didn't say anything for a while. That was exactly right. We sat on his back porch until almost midnight, watching the tree line go dark, and after a while he said, "How do you feel?" "Like I finished a very long project," I said, "and I don't know what to do with my hands." He nodded. "That passes." "I know," I said. "I've read the literature." He laughed. We sat there another hour. 6 weeks later, Eleanor told me Carolyn had retained a family attorney in Dublin and agreed to the terms without contest. The house would transfer. The settlement was straightforward. Eleanor said she had handled more than 400 divorces in her career, and this was among the 3 least adversarial she could remember. "You set the tone," she said. She followed it. I didn't say anything to that. Sometimes the dignified thing and the practical thing are the same thing, and you don't need to announce it. 8 weeks later, Blythe drove down from Pittsburgh for a weekend. We got dinner at the Italian place off Main Street in Millbrook that we'd been going to since she was in middle school. The one that still has the same menu and the same owner and still gives you too much bread. She'd already talked to her mother. She was 24 and not a child and hadn't needed me to manage the information carefully. I'd told her what I needed to tell her and left the rest to her to sort out. "Are you okay?" she said, which was her real question underneath all the others. "I'm getting there," I said, which is the true answer. That's all I needed to hear. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine the way she used to when she was about 7 years old and wanted me to know she was there. "You know Owen's going to want to drive down and fix everything." "Owen's 21, I said. "He can try," she laughed. The same laugh she'd had since she was 3. I have no idea where she got it. 3 months later, Victor Aldrich's Columbus licensing application was denied on the basis of the financial irregularities I'd cited. The licensing board notified him by mail. He had the right to appeal, which would take approximately 8 months, during which time no new territory work could be issued. I didn't celebrate that. It wasn't a victory. It was just a consequence, the specific and proportionate consequence of a man who thought he could walk into a city without understanding who was already there. I rent an apartment now, on the north side of Columbus, 3rd floor, east-facing windows that get good morning light. I bought a table at an antique shop in Clintonville, Maple, solid enough to last another 50 years. I eat breakfast there every morning, with the windows open when the weather's right, and I do the crossword, and I think about what I'm building next. I'm a forensic accountant. I spend my professional life finding what's been hidden in the numbers, the gap between what something appears to be and what it actually is, the crack in the ledger where the truth lives. 23 years is not a ledger entry. It was a life. I know the difference, and I know that what comes after a demolition isn't nothing. It's ground, clean ground, and you can build on clean ground if you're willing to do the work from the foundation up. I'm willing. I've always been willing. That's the only measurement that matters now.